Argentina is on the edge. In recent weeks, the South American country has found itself on the verge of financial and political collapse again. The peso is in free fall, inflation is resurging, and foreign investors are bolting. In the eye of the storm is President Javier Milei, Argentina's libertarian leader who campaigned, as you may recall, on slashing government waste, on crushing inflation, and as he put it, on making Argentina free again. But today, Milei faces his biggest crisis yet. And right now, in an unexpected geopolitical twist, President Trump is stepping in to help Milei. Trump is ready to rescue Milei with the full backing of the American Treasury. So how did this begin? We will cover this in great detail. First things first, how did it all begin? On September the 22nd, just 15 minutes before Argentina's markets opened, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent sent shockwaves through global financial circles. He posted on social media. Bessent declared Argentina a systemically important U.S. ally and promised that, quote, all options for stabilization are on the table.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
How would you like to earn an extra $100, $200, or even $500 a day, even more than that? I have many friends that are earning money every single day trading futures on BTCC. It's a simple process, and even if you don't want to learn how to trade, you could follow a trader on the site and let him do the trading for you. Currently, I am following BlackRock, and no, it's not the Larry Fink BlackRock, that's just his name, but this gentleman has a win rate of 95.33%. His assets under management is a little over 96,000, so he has a lot to lose. Don't just follow the people that have very little to lose. Follow the ones that actually are consistently trading. This is currently full at the moment at 1,200 copy traders. So if you see this basically have an open slot, again, not financial advice, you may want to consider jumping into that. Here's why. As you also see, the last 7 days, his win rate is 100%. The last month, his win rate is 95.51%. And the last 3 months, he's doing about roughly 89%. Again, a lot of you guys want just a copy trader that you can basically follow. But again, don't set it and forget it. Learn copy trading. And again, I'm not trying to have any of you guys use your hard-earned money to lose anything. You don't know what you're doing? Don't jump into this, but there is money to be made, and don't use your nest egg for leverage trading. Use a separate portfolio. But I suggest learn how to trade. Earn you some extra money on BTCC. It's easy. You don't have to KYC, and you don't have to use a virtual private network VPN. This is a wonderful site. They've been around since 2011. Give them a shot. Also, when you earn that extra money, you can store that on your Decent wallet. The Decent wallet was not affected by the recent XRPL debacle, where the backdoor of many wallets was open and there was a breach. So Decent wallet was not affected by that. Decent wallet is as safe as you keep your seed phrase. It's a wonderful product, and you can get the discount by using the link. It's the only way to get the affiliate discount, and that is to use an affiliate link. So that link is popping up on the upper right side of your screen, and it is the one that you will use. You will also get free shipping. Pick you up a Decent wallet today. Secure your assets. If you don't have them stored in a wallet and sitting on an exchange, then you're at risk. So pick you one up today. Thank you. I want to give you an overview of Argentina's economic crisis and potential U.S. assistance. Argentina is currently dealing with a severe financial meltdown, marked by a sharply declining peso, sky-high inflation rates exceeding 200% per year, and rapidly shrinking foreign currency reserves. This turmoil has been worsened by political setbacks, including losses for President Javier Milei's allies in recent elections, which have spooked investors and triggered capital outflows. In response, U.S. President Donald Trump has stepped in with promises of support during a meeting with Milei at the United Nations General Assembly. However, Trump has made it clear that a massive direct bailout isn't on the table, opting instead for measures like speeding up international loans and possibly having the U.S. Treasury buy Argentine assets to help stabilize things. Markets have reacted favorably, with Argentine bonds jumping as much as 5%. Amid this, there's speculation about innovative tools like Ripple's on-demand liquidity, the ODL system, which uses cryptocurrency to facilitate quick cross-border transfers, but regulatory hurdles make it improbable right now. I'll break this down comprehensively, rephrasing key points in a structured way and analyzing implications. So for one, I want you guys to understand Argentina's economic challenges. To understand the context, let's dissect the core issues driving the chaos. Number one, currency devaluation and inflation. The Argentine peso has lost significant value, fueling persistent hyperinflation. But despite Malay's efforts to implement reforms, prices continue to soar, eroding purchasing power and forcing citizens to seek alternatives like the US dollar for stability. Now, there's reserve shortages and debt pressures, but with foreign reserves critically low, the country struggles to meet upcoming obligations. This includes around $9.5 billion in debt payments. This has led to bond sell-offs and a broader loss of confidence in the financial system. Now, there's of course political and market reactions to all this, but Malay's libertarian policies initially boosted optimism, but electoral defeats have reversed gains, causing further instability. Investors are fleeing, and while an earlier $42 billion package from the IMF and World Bank provided temporary relief, more help is urgently needed. The situation isn't new. Argentina has a history of defaults and crises, but the current scale demands external intervention to prevent a deeper collapse. Would that external intervention be something like Ripple with on-demand liquidity? Good question, but now let's take a look into Trump's role and proposed solutions. Trump's engagement represents a blend of ideological alignment with Malay's pro-market stance and strategic U.S. interest. I want to break down a structured look at this approach. For one, it's the meeting and pledges. It's these aspects. Trump met Malay on September 23, 2025. He offered a broad backing without committing to a, quote, major bailout. He emphasized accelerating multilateral aid, such as World Bank loans, and exploring treasury options like purchasing pesos or debt. But it's that potential impact of it all. This could provide short-term liquidity, signaling U.S. confidence and encouraging private investment, but avoids direct U.S. taxpayer exposure. What would be the market response? Well, Argentine bonds surged up to 5%, as I mentioned before, and that did outperform other emerging markets, reflecting optimism about stabilized relations. What would be the potential impact of it all? It's positive sentiment that might ease borrowing costs, but without reforms, it's likely temporary. So would there be alternatives to bailout? Well, if anything, that's why we're watching or listening to this video. The focus on traditional tools like IMF support or dollarization, adopting the United States dollar as official currency, which Malay has considered but not fully implemented, well, these are safer for the United States aligning with America First policies. And that could lead to long-term stability if paired with fiscal discipline. In other words, Trump's strategy is pragmatic, boosting an ally without overcommitting resources. It leverages existing institutions rather than creating new mechanisms, reducing political risk at home, However, critics argue it might not address root causes like corruption or overregulation, and that could potentially lead to repeated aid requests, which brings us into the whole concept of Ripple. Yes, on-demand liquidity, their main product. If you're new to this, Ripple's on-demand liquidity is a blockchain-powered platform that streamlines international money transfers. It works by using the cryptocurrency XRP as an intermediary, for example, converting pesos to XRP and then instantly to dollars, cutting out delays and fees from old-school banking networks. This makes it ideal for scenarios needing fast liquidity, like remittances or trade settlements. Now, there's key features to it all. You're looking at near instant transactions, basically seconds versus days, lower cost, up to 65% savings, and no need for pre-funded accounts abroad. But it's all about the current applications. Used mainly by financial firms for private transfers handling billions in annual volume with integrations in funds like BlackRock's digital liquidity offerings. Keep in mind, there is relevance to Argentina here because with high crypto adoption as an inflation hedge and Malay's pro-Bitcoin views, or I should say BTC, ODL could theoretically enhance dollar access, especially for remittances, exceeding 1 billion yearly. So, what about ODL on the back burner? Well, let's discuss this. If anything, why ODL isn't currently viable for a US-led solution. Despite its potential, integrating on-demand liquidity into Trump's support package faces insurmountable barriers today. What kind of barrier types? Well, let's face it, everybody, it's those regulatory constraints. The specific issue that I've gathered is that basically US agencies like FinCEN, OFAC, and the Treasury enforce strict anti-money laundering and know your customer KYC rules. XRP's partial SEC clearance in 2023 applies to retail sales, not government deals. Let's get into some of the reasons why it's a roadblock. For one, its sovereign transactions would expose public funds to XRP's price swings, often 20% weekly or more. And that would, currently speaking, violate federal laws like the Federal Reserve Act. No precedents exist for crypto in official aid. But there is practical limitations here, ladies and gentlemen. ODL scale, for example, 10 billion yearly, pales against Argentina's needs, which is 10 billion plus for bailouts. It's geared towards private sectors, not massive state interventions. More reasons why it's a roadblock? Well, volatility, risk, and integration challenges with global bodies like the IMF, as in the International Monetary Fund, could amplify instability rather than fix it. Which also leads us to this. It's the political and strategic mismatches. From what I've gathered, there's no links between Trump, Ripple, and Argentina in public discourse, but Trump's crypto support is domestic focused. For example, those BTC reserves. And Malay's meme coin scandals, well, those have damaged trust in experimental tech. What's another barrier here? Well, how about this? Partners like the European Union or China, who might oppose crypto reliance, preferring conventional paths. Ripple's donations to pro-Trump groups are for U.S. lobbying, not international aid. So in a nutshell, at least in regard to this section of our outline, these factors make on-demand liquidity a non-starter. Regulations prioritize stability and compliance over innovation, and the system's current design doesn't match bailout magnitudes. Sticking to traditional methods like loans or asset purchases is far less controversial and quicker to implement. However, let's get into this. A theoretical feasibility if regulations were adapted. If supported regulations were established, such as Treasury approvals for crypto in aid Expanded SEC guidelines for XRP in official uses and international agreements to manage risk, on-demand liquidity could indeed become a game changer. And here's why. Number one, it's a mechanism for dollar delivery. ODL could enable rapid United States dollar transfers to Argentina's banks, using XRP as a brief bridge to avoid settlement delays. This could, or would I should say, be especially useful for urgent liquidity injections in a bailout context. Number two, it would enhance remittances and stabilization. For everyday flows like remittances, ODL's efficiency could boost inflows, reducing costs and increasing accessibility. In a dollarization push, it could facilitate seamless peso to dollar conversions. Number three, it's the integration with broader systems. With standards like ISO 222, ODL could mesh with global finance, as seen in emerging markets like Brazil, partnerships, for example, like Tranglo, show it's scalable for, of course, those institutional needs. Now, there's pros and cons with everything. I want you guys to hear me on this. The pros is faster, cheaper transfers than SWIFT, reduced reserve strain, and that aligns with crypto-friendly leaders like Malay. But there's cons, even with regulations, and that means lingering XRP volatility, which is dependent on tech infrastructure, potentially from resistance, of course, from non-crypto nations. Another pro is boosting innovation in aid delivery, which means setting precedents for future crisis. But there's a con to that as well, and that means scalability for huge volumes that have been untested requires political buy-in beyond US-Argentina ties. But we'd already done the research when it comes to XRP. There is actually unbounded scale here. And for people that want to criticize XRP saying it only has a few thousand TPS and it doesn't have the true scale, check out some of my videos I've done in the past about Ripple's direct partnership with the Bank for International Settlements, because there is such a thing called the M10 and does allow for scalability of over 1 million TPS, as in transactions per second if you're new. Theoretically, on-demand liquidity outperforms traditional systems in speed and cost, potentially transforming how aid is delivered in volatile economies. It could foster greater financial inclusion and efficiency, but success hinges on mitigating risks like price fluctuations through hedging or stablecoin alternatives. Even then, adoption would need strong bilateral agreements and technical upgrades. So, in this analysis, let's get more into these implications. Synthesizing this, Argentina's crisis highlights the limits of libertarian reforms without robust external support, while Trump's involvement underscores geopolitical alliances in economic rescues. ODL represents a forward-thinking option, but current regulations confine it to private uses, leaving conventional tools as the default. If rules evolve, it could revolutionize bailouts by making them more agile and inclusive, perhaps injecting dollars faster than loans ever could. And that is major. However, risks like volatility and unproven scale suggest it's better as a complementary tool rather than a core solution. Alternatives like dollarization offer simpler paths to stability, potentially with indirect ODL boosts for private transactions. Ultimately, the key to resolution lies in structural changes within Argentina, not just external fixes to break the cycle of dependency. So, how would the IMF tap Ripple for XRP with the use of ODL if regulations were already in place? Great question. Well, this is a hypothetical framework, but it's for the IMF integration with Ripple's on-demand liquidity, of course, using XRP. So let's talk about that for a brief moment. Assuming a regulatory environment where cryptocurrencies like XRP are fully cleared for institutional and sovereign use, such as through updated IMF guidelines, SEC approvals for government-scale transactions and international agreements on AML KYC and volatility mitigation, the International Monetary Fund could leverage Ripple's on-demand liquidity to enhance its cross-border payment and aid disbursement processes. This would build on the IMF's ongoing interest in blockchain for efficient global finance, as seen as 2025 initiatives tracking crypto in economic data and exploring stablecoin for flows. Look it up for yourself. There's 3 sources about that. But ODL, which uses XRP as a bridge asset, enables instant, low-cost settlements without pre-funding accounts, addressing IMF pain points like slow, expensive transfers in emerging markets. The integration isn't currently in place, but precedents exist. Ripple has presented at IMF events, for example, at the 2018 seminar. And the IMF praised XRP for improving cross-border payments in 2025 reports. And you can look that up for yourself. There's one on Indeed, and there's another source about that. So when we talk about some of these things, it's like, when I say Indeed, I should say LinkedIn. Excuse me. I get those two confused sometimes. But speculative discussions also link IMF frameworks for stablecoin exchange rates via XRP. So I'm going to get into a comprehensive step-by-step breakdown of how this could theoretically unfold and include technical, operational, and analytical considerations. So number 1, we have to establish the partnership and regulatory alignment. And there's a process that's with it, that the IMF would initiate a formal collaboration with Ripple Labs. This is similar to Ripple's existing ties with central banks and institutions, for example, RippleNet. This could involve signing a memorandum of understanding. That's called an MOU if you're new to this. Or integrating into IMS special drawing rights, the SDR framework, where XRP acts as a digital bridge for currency baskets, therefore making XRP an ESDR, as in an electronic special drawing rights. With regulations in place, the IMF could secure approvals from member countries, regulators, for example, the Fed, ECB, for using XRP in official reserves or aid. If you want to learn more about, for example, the ESDR, check out some other videos in the video section of this channel. Most of my coverage on this channel is non-time sensitive material for a reason. There's key actions to consider, but the whole idea of conducting due diligence on Ripple's compliance with ISO 222 standards, which by the way facilitates seamless integration with global banking systems, you have to keep in mind is setting up a pilot program, just like they did with RLN, Regulated Liability Network, the RSN, the Regulated Settlement Network. Again, that was with Citi and a few other participants. But the bottom line is setting up that pilot program, testing on-demand liquidity for small-scale disbursements, for example, emergency aid to a member country. For all we know, in the background, they could have done a test version with not even real money. And a lot of times, those things are not even disclosed to the public. In analysis, I want to point this out. These steps I'm mentioning mitigates risk like volatility and or incorporating hedging mechanisms. For example, stablecoin pairings, like, by the way, RLUSD. But the benefits include faster aid delivery, and that does align with IMS 2025 focus on blockchain consensus for honest ledgers. And you can look that up right from the IMS site. But there is drawbacks, and that means political resistance from non-crypto friendly nations, which could delay the rollout. But with everything where we're going, the golden age, some of these particular hints of finally getting proper regulations. Hey, I get everybody. The Clarity Act seems like it gets pushed down the road. But I want you guys to keep in mind, it's all about the system integration and that technical setup. And I know this is really technical deep dive, but I want you to understand, if you were to take the time, why this all matters. There's a process here. IMF's payment infrastructure would connect to RippleNet, Ripple's global network, of course, for financial institutions. This does involve API integrations to enable ODL flows where IMF funds, for example, the United States dollar or SDR, are routed through XRP-enabled exchanges. Hence why I feel as though that XRP would be the ESDR moving forward. But there's key actions that need, I should say, to come into fruition. So for one, it's onboarding the IMF as a RippleNet participant, granting access to ODL corridors via partners like Tranglo for emerging markets. And I've seen some of you guys' comments about the whole thing of you're getting tired of Jesse and I covering the whole thing of Ripple is the IMF. You're like, hey, we get it, but you're not understanding the bigger picture. And then hopefully, shout out to all you guys that are listening to this, whether it's driving down the road, watching it from home, listening to it on your phone, wherever the case be. I want you guys to understand there's a configuration when it comes to smart contracts. So those smart contracts on the XRP ledger for automated settlements, would that ensure compliance with IMS tracking of crypto in cross-border data? I think it would. If you don't believe me, look up another source from the IFC. I want to keep this in mind as well. It's a requirement of escrow. So XRP, for example, the IMF could hold XRP in reserves, building on speculations about accessing Ripple's escrow, or source it on demand from liquidity providers. Shout out to Jake Claver for pointing that out. Don't believe me? Go watch his video where he just talked about that a few months ago. All right, a little bit more discussion about this. ODL's design eliminates pre-funding. That means reducing costs of up to 65%, enabling 24/7 operations. You better believe it's ideal for IMS crisis responses. Apparently, as we saw here from the clips that you saw, literally from the lovely Lena Petrova, give her a follow over at her channel, World Affairs and Context. The bottom line is 200 billion is dead end. And Argentina is in chaos as Trump prepares, of course, for that major dollar bailout. Yes, this is why I'm pointing out some of this, because what if this is the rollout for other countries moving forward? Now, I understand it's a hypothetical scenario, but again, this could very well be the one that's tapped. And moving forward, what happens when other countries get involved? Again, we should always pay attention to the things that aren't really being discussed in the mainstream, I hate to say it, XRP news. So I want you guys to keep in mind all of this. And I want you guys to keep in mind that, yeah, there's scalability that's needed for IMS $1 trillion plus portfolio. And that would require expanded XRP liquidity pools. And that would potentially stress markets during high volume events. But it's all about executing transactions, of course, via the on-demand liquidity, the ODL. So for specific use cases like dispersing a loan to a country, for example, in this case, Argentina, the IMF would need to basically initiate an ODL transaction, convert source currency to XRP, transfer across borders in seconds, and convert to a destination currency. There's, of course, key actions about it. I'll break it down in 4 steps, step-by-step transaction flow, but initiation would need to happen, obviously. The IMF would select on-demand liquidity for transfer, for example, $1 billion in aid. The sender's fiat, for example, the US dollar, if you're new to what fiat means, it's just basically like cash, is exchanged for XRP on a partnered exchange. There's, of course, that bridging. What better to bridge it than XRP? Because XRP is a bridge asset, right? So XRP is sent via the XRP ledger to the recipient's exchange, actually as a neutral bridge asset to avoid Forex holds. And what about settlement? XRP always is about real-time gross settlements. So at the destination, XRP is instantly converted to the local fiat, for example, pesos, with funds deposited into the recipient's account. There's, of course, the last step of verification, using blockchain transparency for auditing, aligning with IMS emphasis on verifiable entity and flows. So if you think about it, this outperforms traditional SWIFT systems. Yes, I just said it. Traditional, I should say, SWIFT systems. In reality, it is transitional because SWIFT went from MT to MX. But it's all about going from seconds versus days, and cost transforming remittances and aid in emerging markets is a major win. So risks, of course, include XRP price exposure, which are minimized by short hold times, but benefits like reduced opacity could in fact enhance IMS monitoring of global money flows, and that's major. You don't believe me, look into that as well. That's literally cited from the IMF of what I just mentioned. So I understand you guys are hearing a lot of B-roll. I just don't want to be just me on the screen talking about a lot of stuff. I want to show you some really cool visuals, but I want to get into this other part about that monitoring, because we just talked about the IMF. So that would require also compliance and scaling, and it's a process in itself, right? So the post-transaction, the IMF would monitor via Ripple's analytical tools, and that would ensure adherence to regulations like anti-money laundering that we mentioned earlier. That would mean scaling to involve expanding to CBDC integrations where XRP bridges digital currencies. There's key actions here, but it's the implementation that involves risk controls, such as, for example, volatility, and those thresholds for hybrid models of stablecoins. Now, there's report outcomes to stakeholders, but that potentially means incorporating XRP into SDR evaluations for stable exchanges. Again, hence the term ESDR, and XRP being that E in the ESDR, as in the electronic special drawing rights. We would also need to expand globally. That would mean partnering with central banks. For example, those Bank for International Settlements frameworks, the BIS frameworks. What is one of those frameworks? The M10. What does the M10 do? It allows scale at 1 million plus TPS if you have a direct BIS partnership, which Ripple has. And will that lead to widespread adoption? Will that lead to that scalability that we need? Absolutely. Long term, I want everybody to keep in mind this could very well reshape IMF operations, and that would make them more inclusive, efficient, as noted in World Bank reviews of Ripple for cross-border experiments. Don't believe me? Go right to the World Bank website and look up what I just talked about. Now, there's challenges that include dependency on Ripple's infrastructure and geopolitical tensions over crypto dominance, but overall, these implications have a feasibility that has pros and cons, and I want to just talk about this as well. So for one, what about the efficiency of it all? There are some pros. Instant settlement, and it means reducing delays in aid, cutting costs, and boosting economic impact in crisis. There's cons because the initial setup requires tech upgrades, of course, for the IMS systems. But if you implement Ripple's infrastructure into the systems, then is it that much of a hurdle? I don't really think so. What about the substantiation? Well, on-demand liquidity proven model in remittances, IMF did praise XRP in 2025, and you don't believe me on that. That's also on LinkedIn. And they did do that. And people in the X community have been sharing that. What about cost and accessibility? Isn't that the bottom line for all this? Of course. A pro of this would be eliminating the intermediaries, lowering fees for developing nations. The cons would be XRP volatility could affect large transfers without hedges. And that substantiation would mean up to 65% savings via bridge asset aligns with IMS stablecoin flow studies. That's so major. And I'll show you an example here later in this outline about why that's so major. Is this a strategic fit? Is that a pro? Yes, it's a pro, because this enhances IMS' role in digital finance that potentially ties into CBDC's tokenization. What about a con? Well, this requires global consensus. Yes, it does, risking uneven adoption. But that substantiation means that Ripple's IMF connections and blockchain in itself are the primers for it all. And IMF has cited that in the past. Last but not least, a couple more things to get into. Risk management. Pro. Blockchain transparency aids compliance and tracking. Con. Cybersecurity threats or regulatory reversals. Substantiation. IMS 2025 crypto monitoring initiatives, as cited by the IFC. So in summary, in regard to this segment, With enabling regulations, IMF could tap Ripple's on-demand liquidity by partnering, integrating systems, and executing XRP bridged transactions for faster, cheaper global aid. This would position XRP as a core asset in international finance, echoing speculative theories of Ripple as an IMF-aligned tool. Now, keep in mind, while transformative success depends on robust risk frameworks and political buy-in, we could potentially see the setting of a precedent for crypto in multilateral institutions. Which brings me to this. Remember how earlier I talked about the whole thing of Argentina? Well, think about this. Quant has ties to Latin America through Leckow. How would this benefit Ripple for Argentina? Well, for one, you have to keep in mind that Quant Network through the Overledger platform has established partnership with Leckow. And that basically means Latin American and Caribbean Consortium for the use of blockchain. That was initiated back in 2022 and ongoing as of 2025. This collaboration focuses on enabling blockchain interoperability across public, private, and permissionless networks in the region, particularly for cross-border payments, identity, and tokenized assets. When I said identity, I should have said digital identities. Leckow itself is a permission blockchain ecosystem backed by the International American Development Bank, or I should say Inter-American Development Bank, the IDB lab, and it has over 100 members, including central banks, regulators, and private entities from 12 plus countries. Argentina plays a significant role in Leckow, and this is why I'm drawing the correlation with Quant. It hosts key contributors such as blockchain architect Diego Lopez Leon, who's part of Leckow, and legal coordinator Juan M. Diel Moreno, who leads the ecosystem's legal work group for Argentina. Argentina organizations like Decodes, Accenture, RSK Labs, and ATIX Labs participate in Leckow projects, including the Digital Identity for Development Initiative, which is called the DIDI, for verifiable credentials and supply chain transparency. This positions Argentina as a hub for Leckow pilots in areas like regulatory compliance and tokenized payments. And that does align with President Javier Milei's crypto stance since 2023. I should say his pro-crypto stance. While Ripple and Quant have no formal partnership, their technologies are complementary. I showed you guys a demo with Jesse over at Apex Crypto Consulting of Quant Overledger 2.0 demo, switching to Ripple with XRP for real-time gross settlements. Right, you're not going to use QNT for settlement. You're using QNT as that API gateway layer to literally everything. Again, the Internet of Trust. So I want you guys to keep in mind that Ripple, with RippleNet and XRP Ledger, they excel in cross-border settlements, efficient cross-border settlements, while Quant's Overledger Ledger acts as a universal connector for multi-chain interactions. Ripple has pursued interoperability independently, as we know, with Axelar for XRPL in 2024, but Quant's Leckow integration creates indirect pathways for Ripple to benefit in Argentina. So, what would be the key benefits for Ripple, of course, in Argentina? Well, leveraging Quant's Leckow bridge could accelerate Ripple's entry into Argentina's 1.5 billion plus annual remittance market and high inflation economy, where crypto adoption is surging. For example, platforms like Ripio. I'm going to get into how interoperability via this ecosystem could help. So for one of the main benefits is seamless network integration. Overledger from Quant allows RippleNet to connect to Leckow's permission nodes without custom builds, enabling XRP-based liquidity, on-demand liquidity, to flow into regional DLTs. Ladies and gentlemen, this is huge. What about that Argentina-specific impact? Well, Argentine banks, for example, BBVA or Galicia, would use Leckow for compliance, and they could adopt Ripple for ARS USD corridors, again, as in Argentina with the United States dollar. And that would reduce silos in a fragmented Latin American payments landscape. Again, Gilbert Verdian pointed some of these things about knocking down those walled gardens and those silos through interoperability. Will this mean faster market access and pilots? You betcha. Quant's pre-built gateways lower barriers for testing, as seen in LangChain's city tokenization trials back in 2021 and DIDI projects. But whatever the case be, what would be the impact specifically for Argentina? With Argentina's deregulated crypto rules, Ripple could pilot remittances or CBDC interoperability. For example, linking to potential ARS digital peso, bypassing slow bilateral negotiations. What about the cost and speed? Well, again, interoperability cuts settlement times from days to seconds and fees by 40-60% via shared infrastructure. Again, what about Argentina? Well, think about this. The targets for Argentina's $30 billion plus informal remittance flows, where you have high FX volatility, makes XRP stability attractive and enhances competitiveness versus SWIFT. What about regulatory ecosystem alignment? Well, LangChain's IDB-backed standards ensure compliance with quant handling cross-chain privacy, for example, zero-knowledge proofs. And this would build trust with Argentina's central bank, for example, exploring blockchain since 2024, positioning Ripple in public-private consortia for tokenized bonds or trade finance. What about scalable expansion for it all? Well, this would enable Ripple to tap LangChain's 50-plus nodes for broader Latin America reach, for example, Brazil-Mexico links. And what would it mean for Argentina? It would position Ripple as a plug-and-play option for Argentina's growing DeFi sector, stablecoin integrations, fostering partnerships with local exchanges. In summary, at least on this part, this setup doesn't give Ripple a direct foothold, but offers a low-friction Trojan horse into Argentina's blockchain ecosystem. If Ripple integrates Overledger or a similar bridge, it can unlock tokenized asset markets projected to hit $18.9 trillion globally by 2033. With Latin America as a growth hotspot for real-time developments, monitor announcements, of course, from Ripple or LangChain as regional pilots evolve rapidly. Ladies and gentlemen, what I just mentioned to you is a perfect example of this is the interoperability solution for Ripple when it comes to Latin America. While on the other hand, Axelar is the interoperable solution when it comes to EVM sidechains. And those could very well be, of course, with Latin America as well, but we're talking about specifically not on EVM. We're talking literally about these legacy systems. All right, let's jump over to this. Listen to what Ms. Lena Petrova has to mention here, and then we'll come right back.
The big question is, can Trump's dollars actually fix Argentina? Economists say probably not, at least not alone. Alejandro Werner, who is the head of the IMF's Western Hemisphere department, warns that U.S. help without political support is not sufficient. What Argentina needs is a credible and cohesive economic strategy. It also needs political stability, and perhaps most of all, it needs trust. Right now, it lacks all three. Even inside Malay's own camp, cracks are showing, and they're getting wider. A former top advisor who resigned earlier this year says the current exchange rate policy is just simply unsustainable. He believes U.S. support should come with strict conditions, including allowing the peso to float, building dollar reserves, and also stopping market distorting interventions. So where does this all go? Best case scenario would involve U.S. support stabilizing the peso, of course. Milei surviving the midterms with enough seats to revive his agenda, and Argentina, against all odds, securing a path toward growth and debt repayment, which right now Argentina accounts for 1/3 of the IMF overall lending. Imagine that.
So with that said, where does the IMF get its money? Great question. Some of you guys have been asking this on the community post or in the comment section. The International Monetary Fund gets its main funding from quota subscriptions, and those are from its member countries, which are based on the size of their economies. The IMF has this whole thing of supplemental funding through multilateral borrowing agreements, such as the new arrangements to borrow. It's called the NAB. And bilateral borrowing agreements, those are called BBAs, with specific member countries and institutions. Finally, the IMF generates some of its own income from charges on outstanding loans and also can allocate special drawing rights. Again, I know you guys are getting tired of hearing that. SDRs to member countries for liquidity. Again, think about why I put so much emphasis on Ripple and the IMF and how XRP will be the ESDR. If you understand that, you already understand how huge XRP could be. Okay? So, for one, let's take you over to this. And if anything, I'm going to play this here. This is from literally the IMF. And like it says, Bretton Woods at 75, rethinking international cooperation. Listen to this. Try your own conclusion in regard to this. Play this for a short bit, and then we'll be right back.
As soon as there was this lowering of the price of the swap line, you see that there was a large inflow into US dollars that accentuated from the announcement into the first auction. So the swap line was again very effective and also ex ante in telling banks that they were comfortable investing now in dollars because they could count on their lender of last resort working in dollars. Okay? Now, what is the relation between the central bank swap lines and the IMF, and how can the two live together? Well, central bank swap lines are quite different from the IMF loans. Unlike the IMF, central banks can create liquidity instantly. They can assess the solvency of the banks, which they regulate, and judge the quality of their collateral. And they can address what is fundamentally a liquidity problem while bearing minimal credit risk in the short run. Ultimately, central bank swap lines are a monetary, not a fiscal operation, that therefore relies on collateral, not conditionality, unlike what an IMF program is. It is the comparative advantage of the central banks to provide these swap lines, not that of the IMF, even though one should not emphasize too much this distinction, insofar as we know from this crisis and the previous one, that often sudden stops on countries start by being sudden stops on banks that through the sovereign bank diabolic or doom loop propagates in the country. Moreover, even though swap lines there for central bank swap lines and IMF loans can exist in parallel, they serve different functions and they're well attributed to different institutions that have different goals, different tools, and different mandates. Looking forward, the distinction is less clear. Today there are more than 150 swap lines, many of them covering different parts of the world. And more interestingly, while some of them, the ones in blue in my histogram, are the type that I described to you, they are in order to give lender of last resort to banks, there is also a second type, well exemplified by the People's Bank of China's swap lines, established with major financial centers and big sources of trade with China in order to provide instead clearing facilities that facilitate international trade. And yet a third type, a type 3, of which a good example is the Chiangmai Initiative or the ERM2 swap lines of the ECB that serve to pool foreign reserves in order to sustain exchange rate peg agreements. As we get to the third type, we're getting closer and closer to the IMF types and roles. So to conclude, and as a radical suggestion, if you want, or as a suggestion better rather than a radical one, the IMF can certainly interact with the type 3, and a suggestion that I leave for the discussion is the IMF could show up as an intermediary between the Federal Reserve, since we're talking about dollars, and the other central banks. And I say as an intermediary because many countries, say India or Brazil, would enjoy benefiting from these swap lines, but do not because the Federal Reserve worries about sovereign risk. Well, the IMF could appear in the middle, take the sovereign risk by having a swap line with its SDR, say, and the dollar, and then give a swap line to the Indian rupee or the Brazilian real, therefore the IMF bearing the sovereign risk and setting margins based on the exchange rate risk, as is its expertise, assessing exchange rate risk, assessing sovereign risk, and therefore ultimately bearing that risk. Thank you.
Ooh, that is called adaptation. Radical change as well. Thank you very much.
All right, welcome back. With that said, think about some of this. think about maybe how this was pitched. And if anything, let's take you over to this. I'm going to play this as well. I want you to hear what this gentleman from Ripple has to mention when he pitches this to the IMF. We'll play this as well. We'll jump right back.
Let me invite Ryan, please. Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Zagon. I work for a company called Ripple. We enable real-time cross-border payments for financial institutions. We're lowering the settlement time from about 5 days to 5 seconds, and we're reducing the cost of cross-border payments by about 60%. We're working with about 50 financial institutions around the world to enable this real-time cross-border payment. To the question of will fintech endanger financial stability, I don't think it will if we maintain a strong principle-based approach to regulation. So today, we set regulation at a high-level thematic principle that we apply uniquely to each different technology or product. So for instance, we will have principles around market stability, or operational resiliency, or cybersecurity, so like strong components of a financial system. We apply those, ensuring the controls and the risk mitigants are put in place are unique to the risk and gaps within each product. It's not one standard approach. So we customize how we apply rules and risk to each different product. If we continue that approach of a strong principle-based model, I think we will be very effective at identifying and mitigating the risks that may come from fintech.
All right. Welcome back. With that also said, we're going to play this. Ripple, IMF, Swiss National Bank, International Deep State Connections. Shout out to this guy, Big Daddy Alex. It says Brad Garlinghouse presentation to the IMF and Swiss National on XRP. Well, some of you guys have been in XRP for many, many years. You've probably already seen this. For all the new people, this is really, really major. We're going to play this, and then we'll be back in about a minute and a half. Here we go.
Our view in the future is you don't have to have this pre-funding, and instead you can use a digital asset to have global liquidity on demand. Now, we build upon a tech stack, an open source technology called XRP. XRP originally was built by some engineers who had seen some of the flaws of Bitcoin and the challenges of scalability around Bitcoin. Where Bitcoin today, per transaction basis, it's rather slow and rather expensive. XRP is very, very fast, about 1,000 times faster per transaction and 1,000 times cheaper per transaction. The other dynamic, of course, of correspondent banking is some of the more quote unquote exotic currencies, exotic corridors have been left to kind of stand on their own. And the liquidity in digital assets could be applied to actually make that much more democratized and a level playing field. Ripple's vision from the beginning really has been to apply these technologies in the same way that TCP/IP and HTTP are the technologies underpinning the Internet of Information. These blockchain technologies will be the underpinnings of an Internet of Value, where we have connected devices, we have connected information that will allow payments to flow. And as Norman was describing, if you're a large corporation moving $100 million, that's one thing. If you're a freelancer working in the Philippines doing design work for a company in London and you want to get paid $30 or 30 pesos, Philippine pesos, if that's not a transaction that can easily be enabled. And in fact, for the companies that enable that, they require the freelancer to set up an account and they don't actually pay it out until there's roughly 1,000 USD sitting in that account, and then they would pay it out.
So think about what was just mentioned here and apply that example of the Philippines to something like Argentina. Do you not understand where we're going with this? On top of that, listen to this. Ripple's Brad Garlinghouse and IMS Ross Leckow, or Leckow, probably pronounced it wrong. The future of international payments. This is big as well. Play this key area, and then we'll jump back here as well. Here we go.
So now as I look forward a year from now, like what are the things that are hard for us to imagine being true? And not even specific to Ripple or to XRP's community. I think one of the things that will surprise us a year from now is that banks will be custodying digital assets directly. And I think right now we think about that and think, look, there's no way that's going to happen. They're too conservative. And I think what you're seeing is, two things happening. One is banks are seeing that a lot of money is being made by digital asset exchanges globally, and banks are profit motivated. The second, and as we've talked about it very recently, Ross has made very clear, is regulatory clarity and regulatory frameworks enable banks and financial institutions to lean into these markets. And I think we will surprise ourselves by this time. But I'll also predict that it will be banks in the ASEAN markets where there is this regulatory clarity and there is a lot of progressive, forward-thinking they'll be the first to actually allow for crypto assets custody in their accounts.
If that's not one of the most powerful statements you have ever heard in regard to all of the speculation, people say that all I hear is crypto bros talking about some of this stuff and, Moon Boy talk and stuff. This is from the head honcho himself, Brad Garlinghouse from Ripple. To put it in that perspective, like you never heard before, is absolutely major. And again, IMF Ross Leckow, again, I'm not pronouncing it right. Again, I want to show you something that's so big. And if anything, I didn't know if anybody ever shared this document. This is from Mr. Ross Leckow. Like it says here, he's Deputy General Counsel, Legal Department, by the way, of the International Monetary Fund. As you see here, this was the United Nations Audio Visual Library of International Law. This is major. Anybody, if you're in the community or you just like sharing this like on TikTok, shout out to Francisco, Dennis, Lil, any of you guys, more than welcome to share any research I have. I'm not the type of guy to be like, hey, you can't share any of this stuff. I welcome it because we need to get the message out there. Look what it mentions. Ross Leckow is Deputy General Counsel in the Legal Department of the International Monetary Fund. There you go. That's big. Originally from Canada, Mr. Leckow has been a member of the IMF's legal department for the past 27 years. As an IMF lawyer, he has advised on all aspects of the IMF's operations, including the governance of the IMF, its surveillance over member countries, economies, its financial and technical assistance to IMF members. Mr. Leckow currently leads the legal department efforts to help member countries strengthen their legal frameworks. Again, strengthen their legal frameworks. So when we talk about, for example, Ripple hoping for this legal clarity or this regulatory clarity moving forward, regulations, who better to have in the mix than this person who is literally part of this legal counsel for the IMF. Look what it says here. For the regulation of the financial sector. Again, financial sector, and to contribute to the development of international standards for financial regulation. Again, international standards for financial regulation. This is so major. Before joining the fund, Mr. Leckow practiced law in the private and public sectors in Canada. He lectured frequently in the United States and abroad on the law of the IMF and other issues of international financial law. It is so major. So I want to take you actually to Grok Conversation. I know it sounds crazy to see some of this stuff, right? But how XRP could skyrocket to $1,000 to $10,000. To hit these astronomical prices, XRP would need to become the backbone of the global money movement. I truly feel as though it's going to be a case of that. All research has pointed to this, in my humble opinion. IMF bailouts, derivatives, trading, and speculative investment. Here's what could drive it. And look what's pointed out here. Huge growth in ODL transactions. What's needed? XRP could have or would have to handle more than 10 trillion a year in ODL flows. Some of you guys are like, oh, there's not enough money in the world to make all this happen. Hear me out. Most people have clicked off of these videos. Everybody else that really wants to pay attention, this is right up your alley. Global payment hits 1 quadrillion annually. So XRP capturing 10 to 20%, again, just 10 to 20% of that, would mean 100 to 200 trillion a year by 2035. Some of you guys don't want to hear 2035, and I get that, but hear me out. And like it says, it's possible if it overtakes SWIFT. Well, geez, SWIFT in itself created ISO 222 in 2004, right? I should say introduced it, not created. Introduced it in 2004, all right, when it was still MT. MT messages existed since the 1970s. Now, for the first time ever, as of, what is it, July 14th, if I'm not mistaken, we have switched from MT messages to MX. MX is ISO 222. Again, SWIFT. Again, 2004, Ripple introduced. Same year. To me, it's not a coincidence. That's just my humble opinion, not a coincidence. Look what it says here, which moves 5 trillion daily, and the IMF ramps up bailouts to 20 to 50 trillion a year compared to 1 trillion now. Effect, if XRP processes 200 trillion yearly with a 20% share and a velocity how often each XRP is used of 2025. The utility value alone. Look at this. This is not me stating it, ladies and gentlemen. This is Grok literally stating this. Could support a market cap of 1.8 trillion. And like it says here, with this formula, about $33 XRP. Okay, this is just a starting point, like it says. So the factors must kick in big time. You don't think it's going to kick in big time if they're doing Swift? And that's just with Swift. All right, derivatives market. This is the biggest whopper of them all. We're talking about quadrillions. Look what it says here. What's needed? XRP derivatives, futures, options, swaps would need to grab a huge chunk, say 20 to 50% of the global derivatives market, which is a 600 trillion to 1 quadrillion in notional value. Not enough money in the world. Okay, buddy. That's 120 to 500 trillion in XRP related contracts yearly, driving 1.2 to 10 trillion in actual XRP purchases for margin and collateral, plus 5 to 10 trillion in institutional holdings. What would be the effect? A 500 trillion notional derivatives market could add 5 to 10 trillion in XRP demand, 1 to 2% margin, plus 5 trillion in reserves, pushing the market cap to 10 to 15 trillion, 182 to 273 dollar like XRP, for example. Again, notional derivatives. I don't know, maybe because XRP is a super, a super national currency, notional currency. So many terms, right? I apologize. To reach 1,000, derivatives would need to hit 1 quadrillion notional with 20 to 30 trillion in spot demand and 10 trillion reserves, yielding 30 to 40 trillion, which puts us at a 545 to 727 per XRP. It's pretty nice, right? All right, speculation and reserve demand going wild. What's needed? XRP would need to spark a global frenzy to becoming a digital gold or reserve asset, and this basically means big players like banks and central banks holding 20 to 50% of XRP supply, which is 10 to 25 trillion at $1,000 per XRP. Remember how I mentioned that XRP, according to the World Bank, and also, let's face it, Stellar, XLM, those would be global stable coins, not stable coins, global stable coins, and would require a high stable value. Don't believe me? Look up those documents for yourself. Do your own due diligence or go watch the old videos in this channel. Watch this. Massive ETF and retail investment with 500 billion to 1 trillion pouring in yearly compared to 214 million in 2025. A shift away from the US dollar. What is happening as we speak? Like, have you not seen all the news lately about the shift from the US dollar? With XRP replacing 20 to 30% of global reserves, 3 to 5 trillion of 15 trillion total. You ever wonder why Ripple's applying for all these banking licenses? They're looking to become the new standard in banking. It's my humble opinion. I'm not the only one that feels this way. That you ever notice that David Schwartz always states basically like he doesn't really care all that much about, oh yeah, these banks, like, yeah, it's just, so what about what the banks are going to do? Like, it's like, really? You just got all these darn banks. It's because I think, in my opinion, they at Ripple feel as though that they are going to be the new standard for banking. It's literally going to be like the traditional banking system in itself. I know it sounds crazy. I mean, that's going to take maybe many decades. I don't know. But at some point, we're going to get to a point in life where people won't even use the term banking. It would just be like, oh yeah, I just transfer through Ripple. Like, does anybody call a Coca, call cola? No, they don't. They when you go to a barbecue, what do you like to drink? I'll have a Coke. Just call it a Coke. I know some of you guys are in a Pepsi, but for the most part, you just call it a Coke. It'll be so much of a standard like that. It's just be like, yeah, Ripple, oh yeah, XRP. Like, the concept of a bank. I mean, think about that. That's the way I honestly look at this. And if I'm in the minority, that's okay. Will be the effect of it all. 40 trillion speculative surge could push the market cap to 55 trillion. $1,000 per XRP. For $10,000 XRP, speculation would need to reach 500 trillion, basically absorbing most of the world's wealth. 450 trillion, make it XRP the king of all assets. My God. All right, look at this part. What's needed? for a shrinking XRP supply. I've covered this before with the late great Will Fix. The number of XRP in circulation must drop dramatically. Well, yeah. Think about what also helps lock that up. ETFs. So, what happens when we get more and more of those ETFs? Again, on our channel, Will Fix pointed this out, that in reality, after all the locked up XRP, whether it's escrow, whether it's specifically ETFs, you're only going to have roughly, I think he says something like 2.5 billion, maybe 3 billion left. Anyway, look it up for yourself. But current transaction burns 0.2 to 0.4% yearly could reduce the supply to 55 billion by 2035. To hit $10,000, supply needs to fall to 5 to 10 billion through. And like, again, I just mentioned some of this stuff. Higher transaction fees, which that could happen if they increase it, but I don't think they need to. Per transaction instead of what you see here as far as 0.401. Now, in reality, I think Stellar did something like this. They increased it just a bit as well. So would Ripple do that? So as ODL scales to 200 trillion a year, Ripple or IMF locking up 20 to 30 billion XRP as bailout collateral. Effect, with 10 billion XRP circulating, $1,000 XRP equals 10 trillion market cap. $10,000 XRP equals 100 trillion. At a billion, 10,000 per XRP is 50 trillion, which is more doable, but it's a stretch. At least it says that it's doable. All right, look at this. XRPL is the go-to for tokenized assets. I think it's going to be. Grok says what's needed. The XRP ledger must become the main platform for tokenized assets like bonds, stocks, or IMF special drawing rights. Again, you guys wonder why we put so much emphasis on that. Now you know. If 50 to 100 trillion assets, like 10 to 20% of the global markets use XRP for fees or collateral, demand explodes. Absolutely. In fact, 100 trillion in assets, tokenized assets, with 5% XRP collateral equals 5 trillion demand, boosting the market cap to 30 trillion, which is $364 to $545 per XRP, alongside ODL and derivatives. Because we know that derivatives is the biggest whopper of them all. And of course, for all this stuff, the stars need to align, and you get it. You get an idea. But I do want to share this. I know this is kind of a lengthy, really lengthy video. Global rules in sync. Every major economy, G20, IMF must agree to use XRP for cross-border money flows, sidelining the dollar. Well, again, geez, the IMF. You really think they're going to go back to their old ways? No. Why would they cite so much reference to Ripple? Even old interviews of Christine Lagarde mentioning Circle, Ripple, and so on. She was literally saying, "Your ripples." Think about it. They really know the use case of XRP. Yes, there might be better tech stacks. Don't get me wrong. I think BSV's got the most impressive tech stack out there. I really do. They don't have the current partners that Ripple has yet, right? So would this agree to use XRP for cross-border money flows? I think so. Would this sideline the dollar and SWIFT? I think so. Regulations would need to lock in XRP as a commodity worldwide, beating out CBDCs and stablecoins. And this, in my opinion, when those regulations hit, that could very well be the flip of the switch. Because who would be the top of the list? Think about it. All right, number 2, IMF goes all in. I really think they would. I think that's already been signed. I do agree with Versan Alarja and his brother Vandel. I think that was all agreed upon many years ago. So the IMF would need to expand its lending to 50 to 100 trillion using XRP exclusively, with 10 to 20 trillion in XRP held in reserves. Why? Because they are going to be transacting the Internet of Value. It will no longer be enabling the Internet of Value, as pointed out by Monica Long and a few others from Ripple. You would be at the point of it's literally not just implemented, but it's being used or mandated, or the chosen one. Derivatives boom. XRP futures, options, and swaps must dominate 30 to 50% of global derivatives, 180 to 500 trillion notional. I know some of you guys look at this like, man, you're out of your mind. You don't realize how much money there is in the world. Hey, I get all that. If anything, drop in the comments if you don't feel the same way. That's okay too. With exchanges like CME or Binance handling 50 trillion plus yearly. Investment craze. XRP becomes a cultural obsession like Bitcoin. or I should say BTC, that's a story for another day, in 2021, but way bigger. ETFs pull in 1 trillion a year and retail investors pile in, adding 10 to 20 trillion in speculative value. These things could happen. I mean, I pointed out that this market that we're in as we speak seems more of a non-speculative market compared to how it was in 2021. I mean, 2021, anything that was speculative or positive catalyst would pump the price, not the utility at all. Again, we have not been put into a utility run yet, a utility cycle yet. Still, we have not. Maybe seen little glimpses of that, but we're not even close to that. Supply squeeze, burns or lockups / circulating XRP to 5 to 20 billion. For example, 100 trillion in ODL at 0.2001 per transaction could burn 1 billion XRP yearly. I don't really see it dropping all the way down to that, but anything's possible. I mean, to me, they want to keep this very inexpensive. XRPL takes over. XRPL becomes the top blockchain for tokenized assets, 100 trillion plus. XRP, the main currency, outshining Ethereum and Solana. Again, remember when Larry Fink of BlackRock was interviewed? I don't have it readily available for you guys, but you can look it up yourself. Remember when he was asked specifically his thoughts on XRP? The guy literally asked him, I think it was on CNBC or, Fox Business or one of those outlets, asked, what about XRP? And he was just like, he didn't say yes or no. Think about that. Probably because literally NDA, right? I mean, if it was no, it would have been a hard no. All right, number 7, dollar loses grip. It's really losing its grip. Countless outlets are reporting on that. Shout out to Clayton Morris, Natalie Morris, his wife over at Redacted. They're covering it like crazy. Seriously, go check out Redacted. They're doing a great job covering a lot of this. A lot of outlets are. But the dollar is losing its grip. Countries like China, India, or Brazil adopt XRP for trade and reserves, cutting the dollar's global share to under 30%. And here's why, one of the main reasons why I'm pointing this out in the outline, ladies and gentlemen. I'm pointing out the whole country of Argentina because I think it's going to be a hint of the start. And again, I get it that maybe it's just way too early for them to be, for the IMF to tap Ripple because, again, those regulations aren't in place. But again, what happens when regulations are finally in place? You don't think you're going to see a giant blankety-blank storm of influx happening? What technologies would be a better solution? Are we really going to go back decades ago to the old system to bail out these countries and put ourselves in more and more and more debt? I think the answer is no. And hence why you see the top brass realizing we have to get behind these technologies. And look what it says here. Projections for the crazy scenario. Here's how it sees playing out. Assume 10 countries join over 10 years. ODL scales up derivatives. Again, that's just 10 countries. Year 1, 2026, 2 countries. ODL volume, 5 trillion. Derivatives notional, 25 to 50. Circulating supply, 58 billion. What's driving, like it says, driving it? Early IMF test, 20 billion ETF inflows. Again, just a $10 to $20 XRP, but a market cap 0.6 to 1.2 trillion. And why it makes sense, derivatives multiply on-demand liquidity demand hype for new rules. As you look at some of the other particular years and how this keeps going up, again, like for example, this is 2035. I honestly think it's going to be way sooner than that, personally, but again, we could agree to disagree. Again, look at this. What's driving it? XRP is a global reserve asset, 100 trillion tokenized assets, $1,000 to $10,000. And look what it says here. Market cap of anywhere from 55 trillion to 550 trillion. And you have, for example, why it makes sense. 20 trillion spot buys, 40 to 500 trillion hype, tiny supply. Remember how I mentioned that supply vanishing? Again, so many people click off these videos. They don't even see what the bigger picture is because everybody wants, for the most part, just a quick 5-10 minute whatever. So it is what it is. I went really detailed in this. Maybe you don't even like this format. It's okay. Let me do me. People could do themselves. I don't mean that in a bad way. But anyway, there you go. I mean, again, let me know what you think about all this. I think we are seeing the first examples of countries that are in an incredible debt crisis. Argentina will probably be the first of many. And it's just going to be a domino effect. And then when regulations hit, I mean, is that the switch? It really is. That the switch? Guys, just put in the comments you listen to the whole outline and type in this key comment into it because it gives me great feedback. And just type in flip of the switch, or just type in F. Abbreviate it, right? Flip of the switch, flip, or just switch, whatever you want to do, whatever is easier for you. I more than appreciate you guys listening to these outlines. I know they're really deep and they're really long sometimes, but that's what I do. So, with that said, I know you don't see my camera today. Kind of having a bad hair day to say the least, but I don't even have much hair, right? Anyway, I just wear a hat. But thanks for tuning in. May the Lord Jesus bless you all. I truly mean that, and we'll see you guys on the next one. Over and out.